Hello, and welcome to this episode of Smith's Got Talent, a podcast featuring students, faculty, and alumni of the University of Maryland Robert H. Smith School of Business, discussing how they've helped solve actual business challenges and leveraged AI and other tools to bring innovative ideas to the market. I'm Kim DeGrosse, the Assistant Dean and Head of the Office of Career Services, the host of our program. In this episode, we will feature some incredible Smith Masters of Finance and Masters of Quantitative Finance students and professors who were supported by the Smith Enterprise Risk Consortium and participated in a groundbreaking experiential learning project aimed at rating the effectiveness of bank and fintech companies' credit risk management policies and capabilities and their credit outlook for various consumer commercial asset classes. Professor Rossi, I'm so excited to have him here with us today. He is a professor of practice, the director of the Smith Enterprise Risk Consortium, and an executive in residence here at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. They give you a lot of titles, Professor. Prior to entering academia, Dr. Rossi had nearly 25 years of risk management experience in banking and government, having held senior executive roles at several of the largest financial services companies. He's a well-established expert in risk management with particular interest in financial risk management, climate risk, supply chain, and health and safety risk issues. The professor is joined today by one of his outstanding students, Hrushikesh Ravindra. He's a Master of Finance student graduating in December of 2025. He was in the top 10% globally of the CFA level 1 exam, which I understand is pretty amazing. So good for you. And you also represent our very own University of Maryland on the national level cricket tournaments. That is super exciting. Nothing like a student athlete. So we're so glad to have you both here today.
Thank you.
Right?
Thank you so much for having us.
You bet. Professor Rossi, why don't you just set some context for us, right? Like tell us a little bit about the program and how you lead it and sort of how we got here today.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about CERC to begin with because they certainly were supporting us in getting this project underway. So CERC is our Smith Enterprise Risk Consortium. And unlike other centers of excellence at the business school, CERC is really all about being externally focused to bring risk practitioners across multiple different industries. We focus primarily on financial services, so banking, insurance, pharmaceuticals, right. Aerospace, defense, and tech. And bringing folks that have C-level titles in their names together that do all things risk management to share best practices in risk management, to network, to be able to kind of learn other techniques and other things that would be helpful to them to kind of do their jobs every day.
Right.
So we're really facing off with the industry in what we do. And we also do analysis. And so I've been running these experiential learning projects, if you will. Think about, we call them ELPs. You can think about them as capstones effectively for our Masters of Finance and Masters of Quantitative Finance programs. Been running them for about a dozen years or so. And typically what we do, and this goes back to my own background when I was a chief risk officer at different companies, asking my folks, my directs, so what kind of backgrounds do we need for people to really hit the ground running when they come here? And then it was all about, in our case, it was about getting people that were well-versed in manipulating, extracting large databases for sophisticated financial analysis. So they had to have strong financial programming skills like Python, which Hrushi and his teammates all know, as well as then fairly complicated quantitative methods. So things like econometrics, things like AI, generative AI techniques and the like. And putting that package together, we put these ELPs together so we could showcase those skills. But in addition, I want to put them into as close to a live fire exercise that they would have when they actually enter a job. In fact, I think Rishi's heard me say this many times before, that this is kind of like boot camp for risk management. Gets them ready, kind of toughens them up before they get out to the real world. And so they have to, I set high expectations. I give them 7 weeks to get an exceptionally difficult project done, maybe with, somewhere between 8 to 12 students. They own the project. They have to manage it. Once I give them all the guidance about that, and I'm here to kind of do that, but they actually run the project. They have to manage it as if I were the executive for that program, and that they have to get it done in the time frame. And it runs like that. So they have to figure out, resource management. They have to time management. They have to work with each other, learn how to do that. Who has a comparative advantage in this type of analysis or can do this kind of data work. And then also to be able to communicate. It's what I've learned is it's not just doing the analysis, but the people that have excelled in their careers are the people that can communicate that effectively to senior leaders, particularly those technically difficult concepts to get across to non-technical managers. And that's what we try to do in these ELPs.
That sounds amazing and pretty tough to do. I know Hrushi is an outstanding student here at the school. I'm just wondering, how do students wind up getting to be in a project like this? Because that sounds pretty amazing what you're teaching them.
Yeah, so while it is a 2-credit course, they all, in advance, when they're actually applying for their other courses or doing their other courses, they apply for this one. Okay. So they actually have to apply, and they provide a resume and some sort of explanation as to why they want to participate and why they think they belong in the course. There are also some prerequisites in there ahead of time so that we have the right students in place. So not everybody gets to take these ELPs because we set them up in a way that, and we're fortunate about this, again, with CERC, we have such a network of C-level risk practitioners that we can kind of leverage that talent like we did in the case of this Google ELP. So we want to make sure that we're putting our best students in front of these executives, and because they're pretty busy people, and we want to make sure that they get as much value out of this as we do.
Okay, so you mentioned something that really is what brought us together here today, which is an incredible project that Hrushi and some other students worked on with the Google AI tools and making a presentation this past summer. One of the only schools, if not the only school, to be able to make that presentation to these C-level executives. So, Hrushi, can you share with us just a little bit about the project and what you did on this part of the team to put that whole thing together? Tell us a little bit about it.
So this project was mainly sponsored by Google, and we were trying to use the artificial intelligence in implementing in different types of reports, such as call reports or various bank financial data, that is earnings calls. These kind of materials, it takes a lot of time for people to analyze and just interpret what's going on in there. And with the sort of enhancements in the AI in the past few years, we were just trying to see if we can implement those sort of techniques and get something out of the data that is important for risk management practices, that is also accurate and is consistent with what we want. And that is mainly what we were trying to do through the ELP. And we were lucky that Google provided us with different tools that we were using. Each of them had their unique way of putting them into practice. And the project was basically about learning from someone like Professor who has been there in the industry for the past 25 years or so, and from other Google C-level executives on how can we use these AI practices in risk management and what is the right way to implement those practices, because when it comes to AI, there's a lot of ways in which you can implement it, but it's not always the right way. So you need some kind of guidance as a student to know where exactly you should be applying those techniques and how can someone validate that data. And that is where Professor and all the C-level executives play a big role.
That sounds like an amazing project.
It was a great project.
Right?
Yeah.
So you get the students together, they're getting ready to set out. what's the sort of guidance that you're giving them to make sure that when they give something back to an ELP company that they get something valuable from it?
Yeah, right. No, that's a great question. So again, I dip back into my own industry experience for a lot of that, and say, if I were on the other side and I was the audience for them this time, what would it be that I'd want to see coming out of it? And what I'd want is basically what Hrushi was saying, is the ability to kind of, I have this problem, which is I want to know if I have, in this case, we were looking at, how many was it, 46 banks? Something
40
like
banks
that. 40
and
banks
17
and 17
fintechs.
fintech companies.
Wow. Okay.
So you think back about this, back in the old days, without having
Wait a
the
minute,
benefit.
wait a
I know, we do go back a ways, don't we?
Okay.
We don't want to date ourselves here. But back in the day, when Gen AI techniques weren't really around, it was the old-fashioned, I've got to read all through
Yes.
all these hundreds of pages of each of these companies' 10Q documents, their earnings calls, all that. In today's world, we can dispense with all that. We can just actually, through very kind of focused prompt engineering, iteratively done. And again, it was an iterative process where the students would start off. So my guidance would be, here's some documents that you should get familiar with about what bank risk management is about, so that you can understand, particularly in our case, we were looking at credit risk management techniques, the practices that would be used by these banks and these fintechs to actually manage the credit risk exposure that they have.
Wow.
So they would have to, once they learned a little bit more about that, we'll spend the first week or so kind of socializing them, bringing them up to speed, then they're off to the races to actually go and grab all of this information. So all the 10Q documents, all the investor transcript documents for all of these companies, and then start to work with the Google tools, the suite of Google tools like Google, Gemini, and whatnot, and to ingest that information and then start to apply and develop these prompts that could then start to hone in. We were basically looking to create a rating score. So you can imagine, if you go back to the 2008 financial crisis and you are an investor analyst, and you're worried about what's happening now. It's 2007, so we haven't seen a lot of the blow-ups that we did back in September of 2008 yet. But I would like to at least get ahead of this. How can I know that this company, this bank in particular, is managing its credit risk effectively? That's what these guys were doing. So it's like an early warning indicator to give investor analysts, the banks themselves or the fintechs, a tool that they can use to basically assess how good a job are these companies doing at managing risk, credit risk in particular.
Tool.
Yeah, well, and then the second tool, and this was, we weren't done, right? This is where I kind of throw a lot at them at one time.
All right, now.
So the second tool was a tool to say, well, that's interesting. That tells me a little bit about how effective they are at managing their risk, their credit risk. What I also want to know is, what are these companies thinking lies on the horizon in terms of credit risk exposure going forward?
Okay.
So what do I think about the outlook on credit cards? What do I think about mortgages, personal loans, auto loans, student loans, and being able to kind of say something that over the next 6 to 12 month horizon, can we also build a rating that consolidates or aggregates all that information from all these banks, so we get sort of the pulse of the industry, so to speak, in terms of what the credit outlook is.
Right.
So those are tools that companies really need. They need to understand sort of leading indicators. Where are things heading, so that they can start to make strategic decisions on where to allocate.
Huge business impact, sounds
Huge,
like,
I think so,
right?
yeah.
Now, when you started out with your colleagues, what did that collaboration look like? How did you guys go about breaking down the assignment essentially and putting it together to deliver a result?
Sure. So one of the major things that initially was something that was unfamiliar to us, because a lot of us, we haven't been exposed to the banking industry. We first decided to get familiar with all the data sets that were there and all the reports, basically all the call reports, what kind of ratios should we be looking at to understand credit risk, what kind of other things that we should be, like let's say there's investor transcripts, what sort of tone can we expect in the industry, in investment transcripts, and what can we basically identify from those, and what should we be actually looking at. So that was something that we started with. We first decided to take 3 banks and read all the reports for them, each of us, and one fintech, so to understand the differences differences between banks and fintechs and how they present their data. So that was basically the first step of the process. Then it was also about understanding all the tools and playing around them, because we were not familiar with all the tools. We were familiar with a bit of them. So we decided to play around with them and understand what tool can be used to analyze this data set, what can be used to validate this data set. So that was really important for us to basically make a pattern where we should be using this tool for this specific report. So that the first 2 weeks kind of helped understand how we should be using those tools and where we should be using those tools.
Let me just double click there for just a second, right? Because you obviously had a really big cadre of tools. Just tell us a little bit about what were some of the tools that you used and how you actually use them, because they were new for you. So you had to learn the tools and execute at the same time. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So there's 2 specific tools that were of the most use for us. One was the Gemini. That is a large language model. It is basically used to understand the kind of language that is used in the call reports and in other data sets, and to interpret those data sets. So that does help us understand what's going on in a summary basis. There was another tool that's called Notebook LM, and that helped us validate the data, because it is specifically built for people to be able to input the PDFs or the large data sets that they have and to get a crux of it. That helped us understand what exactly we should be looking at, and if we are looking at is the right thing that we are doing. Both those tools together helped us make a pipeline where we would first be inputting all the data in Notebook LM. We were able to validate everything that was going on, and then we were also testing that on Gemini to make things easier and faster, but also making sure that they were accurate. So Gemini was the one that we used for prompt engineering and making sure that we get the right data and we present the right data. And basically Notebook LM and our first practice of going through all the different reports that were there helped us identify which sections we should be looking at in all the reports, because they are basically 25,000 pages or so.
Wow.
And we don't want to
Big data.
Exactly. And we don't want to be looking at each of them, because these large language models cannot handle these large data sets. So it's important for them to understand what we are looking at and what we are trying to get out of the data.
This season, during each episode, we'll have a segment featuring the esteemed AI expert and director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Business at the Smith School, Balaji Padmanabhan, that highlights the role of AI on the topics discussed.
I spent my graduate school days walking around in New York City. I was surrounded by people wearing suits and ties and walking really fast. Most of them were in finance, working for Wall Street. And, I hear the term quantitative finance now, and talking to a lot of them, I remember, is there another type? Like, isn't finance all quantitative? Well, today people do talk of behavioral finance and a qualitative angle, where it's not all about numbers, but things like sentiment, feelings, what investors think, what people think, and so on. And the project you heard was a great way in thinking about how sentiment and factors like this can be used in finance. Now, qualitative is about feelings and not numbers, right? Wrong. The way finance works, ultimately everything becomes a number. So 0.835, is that exactly what people look at when they look at the risk of a firm? Wall Street has gotten really smart at paying attention to numbers, but at the same time not paying attention to numbers. They pay attention to the methodology behind how these numbers were created. And that's a big reason why they believe in the qualitative angle and then the numbers. So what's the link? What's the link to AI? Today, when we talk to ChatGPT, people ask all kinds of questions. Right? I'm bored. Help me. Do my homework. Do you want to do it the easy way or the hard way? Tell me a story. Now, when you have these conversations with AI, the feeling is you're talking to a person. It's a qualitative conversation. It's a psychological conversation sometimes. But ChatGPT and AI are very similar in the sense that we just talked about. Everything is a number, and you're talking to a machine that only understands numbers. One of the most important advancements in AI was made by Google years ago when they came up with a brilliant idea called embeddings, where you can translate words into numbers in a way in which you have AI finally understanding language almost like what we as humans do. Where is this going in quantitative finance? What's the future? We have to spend a lot of time talking about it, but here's a quick sense about just the investment, the sentiment piece. So for instance, in the old world, we had humans writing reports for humans. Now, Wall Street in the last 20 years has already gone away from humans writing reports for humans to humans writing reports for machines, because they've had machine learning algorithms process analyst reports, extract information, and then act on it. What's happening now is machines helping humans write reports for humans using machines to understand reports. Very soon, we're going to have machines talking to each other with humans in the loop, or AI in the loop. We're building a very interesting future. Early days are going to be investors looking at content, and you would ask, what would happen? Like if you just focus on investment reports, is this going to get more variance or less variance? There are arguments to be made in either case. Because of AI writing these reports, are we going to have more types of reports for the same firm? Hundreds of versions of an alphabet analyst report tailored to each person's needs. Similarly, when we have consumers not consuming the content on their own, but using AI to consume content, are you going to have one version of a consumer consuming this content, or is each person going to consume it using their own AI? And depending on how this plays out, this is going to create more or less variance in the finance world. And as we all know, finance folks love variance.
Professor Rossi, it sounds like there was an incredible amount of work that these students put into this project. What were sort of the results or business outcomes really that came from the work?
Yeah, so one of the things that sticks in my mind, Hrushi, you should chime in on this one, was during the project, of course, what I described before, we were actually creating scores. Scores on each institution, bank, fintech company, on their effectiveness to manage credit risk, and then separate scores for each of those institutions on the sentiment, if you will, of their credit outlook on various different asset classes. So that was kind of like the tangible output, if you will. But along the way, one of the things that we were all curious about early on was, are the scores effective at predicting the quality or the effectiveness of companies' abilities to manage these risks? And we were puzzled initially when the students came back and showed us scores that were all very tightly clustered. And these were scores that were like within for the last 2 years, last 8 quarters, if you will. At first we were kind of saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. We should see a lot more variation. Well, then we asked the students to go back and take a look at the 2008 crisis period, run that same set of code against 8 institutions, 4 banks that failed, one that was, again, one of my institutions that I worked at, Citigroup. It was a near-death experience, and then 3 other banks that actually survived, like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, et cetera. And tell me what the scores are when you do that. Well, we got this great dispersion that came out that validated for all of us at that point that, the reason why we were getting tightly clustered scores was because in today's world, we've had a very benign environment for credit risk to actually show up. So right now, everything looks pretty decent. Back in the late 2007 period, we could start to see that there's a lot of differentiation between how some of these companies were managing. So those are kind of the big takeaways. But these scores really allow companies to be able to kind of go in and say, how good a job are they really at managing their credit, and how are they looking forward at the credit horizon.
Right. And from the student's perspective, how did you see the project wind up for your client?
Yeah, so as Professor Rossi mentioned about getting the credit scores, so it was important for us to also be able to understand how the different documents give us different scores. So as he mentioned, we validated everything on the 2008 financial crisis, and we did get the right results that we were looking at. But also one other thing that we noticed, and the thing that we didn't think we would notice, was that investor transcripts, which is where all the management speaks about their company, they tend to have a 0.5 higher score as compared to the call reports, which was something that we didn't know. And that is one of the things about AI, is that you need to be able to understand how to use it. So if you were just looking at the investor calls, you would think everything is going right because you have a higher score. But then you look at the call reports, which have actual quantitative data, you understand that it's not necessarily what's going on, but it is also something that we need to take into consideration. So that is one of the things that really surprised me. And one other thing I really liked about model was that we were also giving the reasons for those scores. So our model was able to give what specific reason was there that it gave that specific score. So that was something that I thought was of real value, because then you would be also able to understand and interpret the score and get exactly to the point where you understand what is something that is going wrong in the bank and what might be something that is going right in the bank. So that was one of the outputs that I think is very valuable to the industry.
Yeah, that's if I could pick up on that for just a second, that is very critical. So instead of just getting back, they scored out as a 4 or as a 3, what Hrushi's saying is that the students actually developed a set of criteria that would be weighted to come up with that score, so that we could do they could do the decomposition and say, well, the reason why they're a 4 is this, this, and this. And that is, again, very crucial to understanding, well, it's because they weren't managing the way in which their credit policies are deployed or something like that. And then so we really kind of focused a lot on that so that it wasn't just some black box tool.
Well, it sounds like the insights that you can deliver to companies with this kind of a model could actually impact the bottom line. I'm sure from a risk perspective, what would you see that in terms of financial impact or labor, impact for a firm?
Yeah, so I think about it in two ways. If you are a firm, like if I was back still at, say, Citigroup, I could see deploying tools like that to help us, because we would develop things that we call leading indicator analysis in advance of, let's say, board meetings. And we would use that as guideposts to say, what are we seeing on the horizon? What do we want to communicate to the board or executive committee on where we're heading with credit risk? This could be one of those types of tools. The second score that I was mentioning, where we've been talking about the credit outlook tool, is a tool that can be done to exactly look out into the horizon and say, here's what we think the performance or the headwinds or not around, let's say, auto lending is going to be. So the institution can use it. They could use those tools for leading indicator analysis. They could also use it to get sort of the pulse on how good a job they are doing in managing credit. And they can also do peer analysis, right? I can say, how do I look compared to, other large banks or whatever? So that's a big one. Flipping that around, vendors that are, in the AI space now that are already supporting financial services companies could be leveraging tools like this. We look at it as a prototype, but if expanded to the full space, if somebody were to like a Citigroup or just a big bank in general, not necessarily Citi, but let's say a large bank that we're looking to do something like this, we're talking that's a significant investment. Maybe, in my opinion, maybe in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a substantial effort, and while again, it was a 7-week exercise, the 8th week being the final presentation to the sponsor, Google. At the end of the day, the students were definitely able to demonstrate, in my opinion, that this is a very viable proof of concept.
Wow. Well, I know one of the sponsors, Fuad Alam from Google, said that if we're able to scale something like this at an industry level, it could change the game in terms of how we look at reading financial disclosures in general. How does it feel to kind of be a part of something like that?
I mean, it is definitely amazing to be part of something that was never done before or never tried before. And that was also something that the Google folks vouched us for. And the thing is that when you get to work with Professor Rossi or all the other C-level executives that were present in during the Google ELP, I think it gives you a sense of how to work under pressure. And as a student, that is really important because you work on different projects. You would get marks for them, and it doesn't really give you the industry level pressure that is needed for someone to be able to understand your abilities. And that project, the ELP, did test us on that level where we were under a pressure of giving the deliverables within the timeline that was provided to us, and we were happy to have given something that was valuable to the industry.
I'm smiling and I'm a little bit laughing at this because Hrushi knows that we talked about this at the outset of the project, and it goes back again to why these ELPs are so important. It's not just about book learning, right? They're going to get that. They're going to check the box when they come out of a course like this or any of the others that they're taking and get a grade. But what they need to get, because they are in a business school, I've always thought students have to learn early on, and it's better to learn in an academic setting, how to actually work with another team in a higher pressure environment, and maybe not always for the easiest person to work for. And I told him, I said, I'm taking my professor hat off this time and I'm putting it aside. I'm your boss, and if you can work for me, you can pretty much work for anybody. So they were put through the paces. So the end product is very good. Let's just say
it certainly is.
Yes.
One of the things that's key that you leverage in this project was obviously the AI tools, right? I'm curious, how do you really see AI impacting the world of finance just going forward? I mean, it's moving at the pace of lightning at this point.
Yeah, it is. We just did a webinar on that, a webinar on the impact of AI in financial services, and it is. It's transformational. It's transforming right at pretty much every industry at this point, but financial services, which has not been known historically as being one to embrace technology quickly.
Not an early adopter?
Not an early adopter.
Okay, fair enough.
Some do it better than others, but in this case, it is making its way into basically all facets of financial services, whether it's the risk management side or it's on the front end interface, the customer experience that's going on. It can be all sorts of back office types of analysis, trading applications. So you name it, it's here to stay, and folks need to pick up on these tools and be able to know what to do with them. But importantly, to also know what the limitations are, and I think that's part of the process that the students learn in this ELP.
And we'll wrap up there with you sharing, what do you think you learned most from being involved in a project like this?
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was that to be able to collaborate with the team, because you, in this sort of situation, you need to understand what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are, and you need to assign those things to each other and be able to collaborate with each other to bring the best out of yourself. And that is something that is really important when you are working under a high pressure and you have the deliverables on time. And so that is one of the biggest takeaways for me, where I got to learn how to collaborate with people and how important it is to be able to work together and provide something that is valuable. Because if you try to work everything out yourself, then it definitely is not gonna work. You might be able to get somewhere, but without the help and inputs of others, you wouldn't be able to do so. So I think that is very important for me, and that is something that I take away from this.
A great lesson, right? I just want to thank you both for joining us here today on Smith's Got Talent. This is an opportunity for us to share with the business world the incredible programs that we have here at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. And till next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
To learn more about how to hire our students that can innovate in your business, please email us at smith ae at umd.edu. Again, that's SMITHOCS-AE at umd.edu.